Hey guys, DB here. So today I'm going to be covering three build strategies. They're defensive build strategies for L or TA. Um, what these builds are going to be, they're fill builds, and they're builds that you could be doing if you choose to, along where you think that your opponent's going to be coming through, and they're meant to slow your opponent down as much as possible. What this video isn't about is it's not about build strategy in terms of like where to put your forts or how to create like redundant loops. Redundant loops are basically like creating a loop of PSs so that even if you lose a fort, you still have power to the rest of your PSs, or if somebody cuts a line through some PSs, you have another loop that feeds power back. So we're not going to be covering that stuff. So to jump into it, the first type of PS build that I do is real simple. It's a spam PS. I don't do this often, and I definitely don't do it if I have time to build properly. But when I spam PSs, I'm usually using it as a distraction. I'll spam in one location and distract my enemy, and then I'll be properly building in another location. So that's when I would use spamming. The other time I would spam builds is if I'm in a rush and I'm under the gun for some reason and I don't have time to build PS properly. That's when I would spam build. When something like that can happen is like if you're like 2 hours before grand exploration stage, and one of your allies stabs you in the back and just pulls all their PSs and all their forts so that somebody can drop a fort in your zone. That's an example of when you would spam build. Not something that you should be doing hella often. The other type of build is what you see here, right? So this part, imagine that it just keeps continuing this way. So as you can see here, I have a one tile gap between these PSs. That's how I would continue to build, with the one tile gap facing in the direction that I expect my attackers to come from. So with this setup, this means I'm expecting my attackers to come from here. They're coming this way, right? They're not coming from the top down. They're not coming from this way. And the reason that I say that is because this one tile gap is meant to give you space to drop your PS back. So let's say, for example, if your PSs are being attacked, let's say what I'm placing right now is an enemy PS that's already been built. If I'm right up to the edge here, I can now attack this PS, right? What's going to happen is I'm not able to properly protect and maintain this PS. I know that it's going to fall. So what's going to happen is right around like 10% left, 10, 15% left. You got a minute or so, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5. You want to demo the PS. You don't want to let it completely burn out, because people who are on top of the ball and they're organized, as soon as that PS dies, they've already got an R4 set up with another PS to drop in and make ground. So you want to kind of try to surprise them with when that PS goes away. So you demo it, right? And then you move it one back. So let's say this is where the PS is, right? I demo it, I move it one back, right? Now what that's going to do is it's going to give your opponent only a one tile gap to move forward in, right? So that means that as you drop this PS back, they only have one tile at a time that they can move forward and fill. So it significantly slows them down. Now, the other reason for the gap is that you can drop this PS back several times, and aside from that, you can also continue to drop back even if it's an overlap build. So as opposed to this, you can drop it back like 1, 2, 3, 4 times maximum. If it's an overlapped build, you can still drop it back a couple times, right? Once. You can still drop it back once. So from here all the way to here, I hate these PSs. So from here all the way to here, that would still create a one tile gap. So that's the reason for the one tile gap. Now, this is just a straight line here. So I would keep this build going. You know, my next PS would be like this. Like that. That's how my next PS would be. And the way that you connect them is by building alongside them, right? So you want to fill this gap. Now you can do a tight weave like this, or you can do a looser weave where it's just hitting the border like that. Where you would do a tight weave and where you would use this is somewhere around the middle of zone 2 or 3. You could use this, or in the areas that you don't expect there to be a lot of traffic. So if I was to use this in the middle of zone 2 or 3 along the path that I expect my my opponents to come through, I would do a tight weave, right? The reason I would do a tight weave is it's tighter, there's more PSs to go through, there's less space for them to go through, right? If we don't build in time. So the reason that you do this, again, is that as this PS burns, you can drop it back. But the other thing is also that why you do it in the middle of zone 2 or 3 and not, let's say, on gates, for example, is because this requires for R4s to have a lot of attention on the PSs, right? So typically what happens is as people come through gates, they fan out, right? Right at the beginning, as they take a gate, they fan out, and there's lots of PSs burning. They fan out wide. And then as they start to make their way through the zone, they kind of form like a spear point, right? And they kind of pinpoint the direction that they're heading in. So you don't want to do builds like this around gates because you're going to have to be eyes on them to demo them, to put them up before your opponent puts up the next PS. Because with this gap, if you're not on top of it and you're not building PSs in there, they can take advantage of it and gain more ground. If you are on top of it, you're popping the PSs in as soon as you demo them, then no problem, right? Now, what I do is I'll typically, when I'm sitting there watching an opponent, I'll typically do what I've got here. I've got this PS already out, ready to build, and you can actually still click on this guy and hit demo, right? I'm not going to actually demo it, but you can hit demo, and then boom, as soon as it disappears, you drop this one into place. So you don't even need two people to do it. One person, one R4 can do it. But again, you don't want to do this up near the gates. You want to do it towards the middle because, again, they're going to be forming a spear point. There's not going to be as much going on. You're going to have a little bit more time to focus on PSs. Now, what I would recommend is some of the R4s who either aren't MM and can't do like mass rallies and stuff like that, weakening towers, or some of the weaker MMs who can't do much fighting, those are the people that should be on like this PS duty. Now, the other type of build, and these are the types of builds that I typically do around gates or around my forts, for example, is this type of build. So again, like my scaffolding is going to be 1, 2, 3. And in this example, I'm expecting my attacker to come from here up, right? Now, the first thing that I did was I built my scaffolding, right? Like 1, 2, next one would be somewhere around here, right? And then I popped this PS here. Right now, I'm going over where I put the PS so that you can see exactly where the line is. The line of the PS butts right up to this PS. I call these guys, I call them support PSs. So it butts right up to the line. It's not further forward. It can be further back if you want it, but it butts right up to the line. Now, the next one that I would be putting on the other side is not going to be in line with this guy. It's going to be back one and over one, right? Now, what this does is, again, it creates a little gap here, right? So what's going to happen with this build, it's very similar in the effect as the other build that I went over, but it doesn't require constant supervision. I don't have to demo a PS and drop it back one. It automatically gives me, less of a gap that people can come into, right? Because this guy is butted right up to here, this guy is back one. It gives your opponent, once they've burned this PS, sure, they still have some space, more space than with the other build strategy, but you don't have to be sitting there watching it, right? So I do these up around gates, I do these up around buildings, and typically, like, why something like this would be helpful is, like, specifically, let's say if you lock somebody into a zone, right? If you lock somebody into a zone, those people are going to be, you took the gate, those people are going to be looking for the best possible time to break out, right? So they know who your bigs are. They know where, right around what time they're active. So let's say, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. That might be when they try to break out. Now, you guys should have somebody watching round the clock, but again, your biggest players can't be on 24/7. They got to sleep. So doing a build like this could help to keep somebody that you've locked into a zone from making too much progress if they're trying to break out, right? It slows them down. They can't continue to build way too much. It'll slow their progress down significantly, and you don't have to watch it. Now, as you go through and set these builds up, what you should keep in mind is that these are kind of like these support PSs. They're kind of like little feet shuffling forward step by step along this scaffolding. And the reason that you don't want to do this all across a zone is because it's a tight weave. It kind of needs to be a tight weave in order for it to work properly, right? Otherwise, you just do the one tile gap strat. But this one has to be a tight weave, and because it's a tight weave, it takes up a lot of PSs. You don't want to do it all across zone 3, for example. Now, to give you guys a visualization of where you could be using this, let's go up to zone 3 here, right? So this is Soul. This is zone 3. Let's say this is my gate, and this is the gate that I've taken to get to Soul. Let's say I get beaten out of Soul. With Soul, they don't got to sit and wait for grand exploration stage. So as soon as you get to zone 3 and you've secured zone 3, you should start filling all of it, right? Now you see how much space there is to fill. Again, I'm not going to cover the strategy of 2 alliances and how if they crisscross and all that other stuff. You guys can figure that out, but there's a lot of space to cover here, right? So you don't want to do that tight weave all across zone 3. It's a big area, right? So what I would do is, again, let's say this is my Z2 gate. This is the gate to my Z2. This is the gate to Soul, right? What I'm gonna do is right around this area, right, because this is the path that they're gonna take, right, this way. They're gonna go this way to hit my gate. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna build PSs in a tight weave all around here, right? I'm gonna surround the gate all around here, and I'm probably gonna keep it going to somewhere around here, right? And I'm gonna do the same kind of distance around here, right? I'm gonna do the same thing around my buildings, right? Up to about here. And then the space in between these, right? I would do a tight weave 1 tile gap strat. And then let's say these are my gates. These are my, my neighbor's gates, right? I may do loose 1 tile gap builds here to here to here, like all this area, like let's say like that area right there, that can all be loose one tile gap builds. And the reason why is because nobody's going to be pushing this way, right? But at the same time, you do want to fill all of zone 3 because if they take your gate, immediately they can drop a fort in your zone 3 and they can start pushing you back to zone 2. So you do want to fill the whole area. The space required for a fort is 4x4, so you want to fill the whole area, but you don't want to take up a crazy amount of PSs. So again, from like here to, I don't know, like here, a lot. All that can be, you know, loose one tile gap. They don't need to be tight. The reason you still want to do a one tile gap, or at least I do, it's up to you guys if you want to or not, but the reason that I always do it is because you never know if one of your neighbors is going to fuck up or if they're going to stab you in the back, for example. I had a situation where, you know, like if this was my gate, I was allies with the guy over at this gate, and somewhere in this area, they pulled their fort. Now, they said it was an accident, that they wanted to pull the fort and put it somewhere else, whatever. But they pulled the fort. Our opponent took advantage of that, popped their fort right in here, and then started pushing towards my gate with it, right? So that's why, like, even in areas that there shouldn't be much traction or much fighting, I'll still do a one tile gap build. I'm not going to spam build, right? That's me. That's how I would do it. Ari knows, like, that's how I built all across fucking L. But, yeah, I don't know. Let me know if you guys have questions. Again, just quick recap. You know, loose builds up around here in the areas, loose one tile gap builds in the areas that shouldn't have much traction. Tight, no gap builds. I call them diamond builds sometimes. Tight, no gap builds around the buildings, around the gates. Potentially, you can even do the same thing in zone 2 if you want to. But zone 2, I don't know. Like, if I'm pretty evenly matched with my opponent, I don't think I'm going to get pushed back. I may just leave it and backfill it later just so that I make sure I have enough PSs to cover every fucking inch of zone 3. Yeah, other than that, I don't know. Let me know if you guys have questions.